Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dr. Creepy. In tonight's video, we dive into 4 most disturbing true winter horror stories, chilling encounters from snow-covered neighborhoods, frozen back roads, and quiet rural homes where the cold brings more than just silence. From strangers knocking during whiteout blizzards, to footprints circling houses with no beginning or end, to voices calling from beneath frozen lakes, these stories reveal what really happens when winter nights grow long and something else moves through the storm. If you're new here, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new true horror stories. Now get comfortable, and let's start. I grew up in a rural stretch of northern Ohio, where winters felt longer than they should, and the nights had a way of carrying sound farther than you wanted. The kind of place where snowdrifts climbed halfway up barn doors and where neighbors were half a mile away but close enough to hear if something big screamed in the woods. When my parents moved to Florida after retiring, they left the old farmhouse to me, mostly because I was the only one stubborn enough to stay. I told myself it would be peaceful, quiet nights, plenty of space, a good place to reset my life after a breakup I won't bother explaining. But the first winter alone in that house taught me that quiet isn't always peaceful. Sometimes quiet feels like the world is holding its breath. It all started with a sound I chalked up to a wandering deer, or maybe a stray dog. Something stepping through snow. A slow, deliberate crunch, then another, then another. I heard it the first week of December, around 1 a.m. I woke up thinking the furnace had clicked off, or maybe ice was sliding off the roof, but the noise didn't match either of those. Whatever it was moving. Not fast, but with intention. Step, pause, step. The shuffle of weight pressing into snow. I lay there listening, telling myself not to be paranoid. The house was old. The wind always found new ways to make it groan. But wind didn't make footsteps. When I finally got out of bed and peeled back the curtain, I didn't see anything outside. The porch light illuminated maybe 20 feet of yard before the rest dissolved into darkness. Snow glimmered untouched, perfect except for the little grooves of drifting powder. No tracks, no animals, nothing out of place. I almost convinced myself I had dreamed it. Eventually, I went back to bed. The next morning, after a night of half sleep, I stepped outside with a shovel to clear the walkway. That's when I saw them. Footprints, just one set, circling the house in an almost perfect ring. They were deep too, pressed into the snow with the weight of an adult, spaced like someone had taken slow, steady steps around the entire property. I followed the line, heart pounding, realizing it wasn't just one loop. It was 2. Someone had walked around the house twice and never approached any door or window. No starting point, no ending point, a ring. I stood there staring stupidly, convincing myself some hunter wandered off course or some idiot kid came by to mess around. But the nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and no one in my town would waste their time creeping around someone's property in the middle of the night. And even if they did, why walk in a perfect circle? Why not come up to the door and knock? Why not try a window? I erased the tracks with the shovel, trying to shake off the unease. It snowed again that afternoon, and by evening the yard looked pristine. I told myself that meant a fresh start, but when I went to bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the footsteps. I left the bedroom lamp on like a coward. The second night confirmed it wasn't my imagination. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Even the usual groans from the radiators felt muffled, like the cold outside was swallowing the sound. Sometime after midnight, I woke up again to the same slow, steady crunching. Step, pause, step. This time my entire body reacted before my mind caught up. My skin prickled. My breath felt too loud. The air carried a strange, faint vibration, as if the sound wasn't just outside, but pressing against the walls. I didn't look out the window. I couldn't. Instead, I sat frozen, staring at the dark doorway of my bedroom, listening as the steps moved along the side of the house. My property, my space. Whoever or whatever it was didn't hurry, didn't try to hide. It walked with the confidence of something that knew I wouldn't come out to check. The steps continued for a full minute, then stopped. Silence pressed in like thick insulation. I strained to hear breathing, whispering, anything, but the night went still. Still in a way winter shouldn't be. Even wind seemed to avoid the house. The next morning, I already knew what I'd see before opening the door. The ring was back. A perfect circle. Again, 2 loops around the entire building. No variance from the night before. No cuts across the yard. No tracks leading to the road. Just that same expressionless path around the perimeter. I took photos this time. Not because I planned on showing anyone. I wasn't ready for that. But because I needed proof for myself. Proof I wasn't losing my mind. The following nights were worse. The footsteps always came between 12:30 and 1:30 a.m., always slow, always patient, always circling. Some nights it made just 1 loop, other nights 2 or 3. Each morning the ring in the snow looked the same, despite how many laps I heard, as if whatever made them erased its earlier tracks and replaced them with only the final path. That made my stomach twist. Animals don't hide their tracks. People can, but not with that level of precision. By the 5th night, I bought outdoor cameras. Maybe that sounds like something I should have done earlier, but fear makes you hesitate in strange ways. Part of me didn't want to know what was outside. Another part knew I needed to. I set up cameras facing each side of the house, high enough the wind couldn't knock them off. They were motion triggered, with infrared. The instruction manual boasted unstoppable night detection. That made me laugh at the time. That night I stayed awake, fully clothed, sitting in the living room with my phone connected to the cameras in real time. Midnight passed. Then 1. I almost believed the weird streak of events had ended. But at 1:14 a.m., the motion alert chimed. Camera 3, east side. I tapped the notification. The image loaded, but instead of the grainy shot of the snowy yard I was expecting, the screen showed pure static. Not choppy distortion, not snowflakes blowing past the lens. Actual static like an old television on a dead channel. The timestamp worked, the menu worked, but the image didn't. Camera 1 sent an alert, then camera 2, then camera 4, all static. Every camera went offline at the same exact moment. Then came the sound from outside, the footsteps, walking in their slow arc around the house. Hearing them while looking at blank screens made something cold and electric crawl through my spine. The steps weren't heavy, they were measured, intentional, like someone pacing through a ritual. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning the cameras were functional again, but the footage between 1:14 and 1:22 a.m. was corrupted on all 4. The files existed but were unreadable. Every single one. The tracks were there in the snow, the same looping ring widening in certain places, tightening in others, as if whoever walked was adjusting their distance from the house. I gave myself until the end of the week before calling the sheriff. I didn't want to be that person reporting mystery footsteps. But the logical explanation just wasn't there. I knew the sheriff personally. He'd been a friend of my dad's. If someone was messing around, he needed to know. But things escalated before I ever got that far. 2 nights later, something new happened. Instead of pacing the house once or twice, the steps circled for over 10 minutes. Each round was slightly faster. Not running, but tightening, shortening the pace like something growing impatient. I sat on the sofa, gripping the armrests, barely breathing as the crunching noise grew more rhythmic. My heartbeat felt synced with the pattern. Then all at once, the footsteps stopped. Silence settled again. Thick, almost hostile. I didn't hear anything else, but I felt something. Pressure, like someone standing just outside the wall. You know that sensation when you're not alone even though you can't hear a thing? That heavy awareness? The room felt smaller. The air felt metallic. Then in the absolute quiet, I heard a soft drag slide along the outer wall. Not a step. A hand, a sleeve, something brushing across the siding. The next morning, the ring of footprints was closer. Not by much, but enough that I knew the distance had changed, as if the circles were tightening each night. I stopped pretending I could handle it alone and called the sheriff. I showed him the photos, the corrupted camera files, the tracks in the yard. He listened politely, but I could see doubt creeping in. He told me he'd patrol near the property during the late hours for a while, see if he caught anyone trespassing. The first night of patrol, he parked his cruiser near the road around 12:45. At 1:10, he radioed me and said everything was quiet. At 1:22, he radioed again, but his voice sounded different, strained. "Are you sure you didn't see anyone out here earlier tonight?" he asked. "No, why?" "There are prints around your house again. Fresh." But you've been sitting there the whole time. I know, he said. That's what's bothering me. When he came to the door minutes later, his face was pale. He wasn't afraid, not exactly, but unsettled in a way I had never seen from a man who dealt with everything from break-ins to violent fights. I didn't see anyone approach, he said. No shadows, no headlights, nothing, but the prints weren't there when I first parked. They walked the perimeter with a flashlight, checking the ring. He crouched and studied the depth of the impressions. These are recent, he said, pressing his own boot next to one. Less than 10 minutes. He stood, looked out into the dark fields. I don't like this, he said quietly. Not at all. He stayed until sunrise, but nothing else happened. For a while, the sheriff came by several nights in a row. Sometimes he'd watch from the road. Other times he'd walk around the house with a hand on his flashlight, like he was ready to swing it. But the footsteps never appeared while he was present. They only came back when I was alone. By the end of December, I had memorized the sound of them. Slow, calculated, unhurried. They came at roughly the same time each night, but never exactly predictable. Sometimes earlier, sometimes later, always enough to keep me exhausted. One night, right after New Year's, something changed. I woke up at 12:58 a.m. to a sound that wasn't footsteps. It was lighter, like tapping. 3 light taps on the window above my bed. My body stiffened instantly. I barely breathed. Tap, tap, tap. Not knuckles, fingertips. I pulled the blankets to my chin, unable to move. The window was curtained, but the tapping was unmistakably on the glass. Barely there. Testing, checking. I didn't dare open my eyes all the way. Eventually, the tapping stopped, but I never heard footsteps leading away. In the morning, the prints were closer than ever, so close the circle nearly touched the house. In some spots, the edge of the ring was less than a foot from the wall. That day, I packed a bag and stayed with a coworker in town. I didn't go back for 2 nights. When I finally returned, snow had fallen again, leaving the yard looking fresh. But under that new snow, the outlines of the footprints still faintly showed, as if something had walked before the snow fell, not during it. And this time, the ring wasn't complete. It stopped beneath my bedroom window, and there were 3 indentations against the base of the wall. Not boot prints, kneeling marks. Someone or something had crouched directly under the window. That was the night I decided I wasn't going to stay there anymore. Before leaving, I set the cameras to record continuously, not motion triggered. I left lights on. I wanted to see what happened when no one was inside. The cameras lasted 36 hours before the memory cards filled. When I returned to retrieve them, nothing looked changed. The yard was untouched. I almost hoped the cameras had caught nothing, because I didn't want to see whatever had been out there. But when I reviewed the footage, there were 9 full minutes of recorded static between 1:16 and 1:25 a.m. All 4 cameras. The audio was dead silent except for one faint, rhythmic pattern. Crunch, crunch, and underneath it, a soft exhale. The next week, I put the house up for sale. 2 months later, as winter loosened its grip, the buyer backed out without explanation. I didn't argue. I took it as a sign. I packed my final belongings, locked the place one last time, and moved permanently into town. Before I left the property for good, I walked once around the house. Snow was melting in patches, exposing dead grass beneath. But on the north side, in a faint crescent shape that the sun hadn't touched yet, lay the remains of a single footprint. Just the heel impression. The rest had vanished into meltwater. But that one heel print pointed toward the house, facing it, watching. I don't know what circled my home all winter. I don't know why it chose my house or why the prints tightened night after night. But sometimes when snow falls here in town and the streets go quiet after midnight, I lie awake listening, just to make sure the footsteps didn't follow me. When I say I never believed in anything supernatural, I'm not saying it to sound tough or skeptical. I mean it literally. I grew up thinking the world was built on rules, gravity, time, cause and effect. If you couldn't measure it, observe it, or explain it, then it didn't matter. I carried that confidence with me well into adulthood, long after my friends had filled their heads with ghost stories and abandoned building dares. I stayed practical, rational, the kind of person who laughs when someone claims a house is haunted. Everything changed the winter I went looking for my brother. Ethan wasn't supposed to be in the mountains that week. He wasn't the type to do solo trips, and he sure as hell wasn't the type to ignore storms, but life had been rough on him recently. The divorce hit him hard, and he'd started saying things like, "I need air," or "I just need to disappear for a bit." I assumed he meant metaphorically. Turns out, he meant literally. When he didn't show up to work 2 days in a row, his supervisor called me. His truck was found parked at the trailhead of an old fire access route up in the Ridge country. The weather had been getting worse each day. Roads buried, power flickering in most rural counties, so search and rescue had to postpone going up there. When they told me it would take another 24 hours for an official team to mobilize, I felt something inside me snap. Waiting didn't feel like an option, so I went myself. The drive north was brutal. Snow hammered the windshield, the wipers smeared more than they cleared. The highway was nearly empty, except for the occasional plow throwing up waves of white as it passed. My hands stayed glued to the steering wheel, knuckles aching, because something about the silence in those woods, the way everything felt swallowed, made me feel like the whole landscape was holding a secret. I reached the trailhead at dusk. Ethan's truck sat alone, half buried in fresh snow, engine cold. I opened the driver's door, found his gloves on the seat, a thermos still warm inside. The passenger side held his map, weathered from handling. A single hand-drawn circle marked something farther up the ridge, labeled only with one word in his messy handwriting: cabin. I didn't know of any cabin out here, neither did the Park Service when I called earlier, but Ethan had marked it with intent, and I trusted my brother enough to follow where he went. I strapped on snowshoes and turned on the heavy-duty hiking lamp I'd brought. The trail wasn't exactly a trail anymore, just a buried corridor between trees, but I forced my way through. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to change. Sound behaved strangely, muffled and delayed, as if the snow absorbed everything except the pounding of my heart. My breathing formed a cloud that hung in the air too long before dissipating. The temperature dropped deeper than the forecast predicted, cold enough that my eyelashes crusted with frost whenever I blinked. After about an hour, I found footprints. Not many, just one set. They were definitely Ethan's, same boot pattern, same size. But what made my stomach twist was how far apart they were spaced. He hadn't been walking normally. He'd been taking huge strides, almost lunging, like someone moving fast but trying not to run. Every few prints, the snow was disturbed more violently, as if he'd slipped or fought for balance. I followed the tracks for at least 2 miles before the woods thinned enough for me to see the ridge line. And there, at the base of a steep slope, stood a small structure. The beam from my lamp caught the edge of it. Rough boards, a peaked roof sagging under snow, a tiny chimney choked with ice, a cabin, one that wasn't on any map, one that didn't belong here. Ethan's footprints went straight to the door. But here's the part I can't explain, the part my mind still refuses to untangle. His tracks went in, but not a single print came out. The snow around the cabin was untouched, except for the line ending at the threshold. No loops, no wandering, no hesitation, just in. I approached slowly, each crunch of my snowshoes sounding too loud in the dead air. The sight of those prints ending abruptly at the doorway felt wrong. Wrong in a way that made every instinct I had scream to turn around. But I couldn't. He was my brother. The door wasn't shut all the way. It hung slightly open, as if nudged by a gentle draft. I pushed it with the end of my pole, not eager to use my hands. It creaked inward. Inside was colder than outside. The air felt still and pressed thin, like the cabin had been sealed for decades. My breath fogged instantly. A faint smell, old wood, damp earth, something metallic, drifted out. I stepped in, lamp raised, expecting dust and rot. Instead, I found signs of recent habitation. On the right side, a cot lay disturbed, blankets tangled, as if someone had risen in a hurry. A tin cup sat near the edge, frozen water inside cracked from expansion. A candle stub sat burned nearly to the base, wax pooled and hardened beside it. By the small window, a pair of gloves lay on the sill. Not my brother's. These were larger, older, leather so weathered it looked gray, and stiff, as if they'd been left out in the cold too long. I called out for Ethan, but my voice came back distorted, muffled, like the walls absorbed sound the same way the snow outside had. No echo, just a deadened return that made the hair on my arms lift. A set of footprints marked the cabin floor, Ethan's again. They circled the room once, then stopped near the cot. The last print faced the far wall. That wall had scratch marks. Not deep, not dramatic, just faint, repeated lines, like someone had dragged their fingers or fingernails lightly across the wood over and over. I traced my light across them, realizing they formed a pattern. Not words, not symbols, but an arc. A half circle. Almost like something trying to outline a curve. The same shape as the path his prints made around the room. But here's what made my blood run cold. The scratch marks were on the outside of the boards. The inside walls were smooth, but the scratches had pressed through the wood from behind, leaving impressions inside. Something scratched from the other side. I backed up without meaning to, breath stuttering. The lamp flickered. The air grew colder, noticeably colder, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in a second. My skin tightened under my coat. I whispered, "Ethan?" even though my throat felt too tight to speak. Something shifted in the far corner. Not movement I could see, more like the darkness itself changed texture. Thickened. The beam of my lamp dimmed when pointed there, like the shadows swallowed light. I felt watched, not from the corner, from everywhere. Something in that cabin didn't want me there. I took a step back toward the door, another, and that's when the lamp began to fail entirely, strobing softly, then rapidly, then giving out in a dull pulse. The shadows surged forward each time it dimmed, like darkness had weight and momentum. The temperature kept dropping. My lungs burned, my breath came out in ragged clouds. Then I heard it. Not a voice exactly, more like a whisper carried through fabric, a breath sliding between boards. It came from the wall with the scratches, soft, deliberate, like someone breathing out. I bolted for the door. The lamp flickered violently, throwing jagged shards of light. I stumbled out into the snow and slammed the door shut behind me, chest heaving. The cold outside felt warm compared to the cabin's interior. I expected to see Ethan's tracks leaving once I stepped outside. Expected some sign that he'd come out before whatever was in there got to him. But the snow around the cabin remained pristine. No prints except his single line leading in. But as I circled the cabin with my light, I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. The wall with the scratches, the outside was covered in markings. Not faint ones, deep ones. Long, curved gashes carved into the wood like claws had dug into it with precision. Perfect arcs, perfect lines. The entire wall was covered in them, not random scratches, circles, half circles, interlocking loops, almost like something had been tracing the shape of the cabin itself. My lamp flickered again, and for a split second I saw something move behind one of the windows. Not a figure, not a person, just movement, a ripple, as if the darkness had shifted positions. I didn't stay to look twice. I followed my own tracks back down the trail as fast as I could without falling. The forest felt different now, too still, too heavy, as if the trees were listening. Every time I heard the wind, I expected it to speak. Every time I saw a shadow shift, I expected it to follow. When I finally reached my truck and slammed the door, my breath fogged the cab. My hands shook so badly I could barely turn the key. The headlights illuminated the woods in pale cones, and that's when I saw it. Halfway up the trail, right at the edge of the trees, stood a shape. Not human, not animal, just a darker patch of darkness. The outline of something watching. It didn't move, didn't approach. But the snow around it blew sideways in a way that didn't match the wind. I drove out of there without looking back. Search and rescue went up 2 days later when the weather cleared. They found the cabin exactly where I told them, but it was empty. No cot, no gloves, no cup, no candle. And the scratches on the wall, gone. The report listed the structure as likely used by hunters in past seasons, currently unoccupied. They didn't find Ethan. Not a trace. Not even inside the cabin. The official explanation is that he got lost, succumbed to exposure, and his body was buried under snow somewhere in the ridge system. But that doesn't explain the footprints. It doesn't explain the absence of tracks leaving. It doesn't explain the way sound died inside that cabin, the way light dimmed, the way the air felt like something alive pressed against my skin. I've tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself exhaustion and fear distorted what I saw. But sometimes, late at night, I wake with the memory of that whisper, soft, deliberate, sliding through wood. Sometimes I dream of the scratches on the outside walls, the arcs and circles etched deeper and deeper, until the whole cabin seemed like the shell of something waiting to break through. And sometimes, when it snows heavily enough, I swear I hear something faint in the quiet outside my window. Not footsteps, just breathing, like something patiently tracing the outline of my house, waiting for me to go looking again. The night the blizzard hit, I was already on edge. Winter storms aren't rare where I live in northern Ohio, but this one was different. Something in the air felt charged, almost electric, like the sky had been holding its breath all day. The wind had begun howling before sunset, rattling the loose shingles on my roof and pushing snow sideways across the fields. By the time night came, visibility had dropped to almost nothing. I'd planned on hunkering down with a movie and a heavy blanket, but the power flickered twice, then cut out entirely around 10:30 p.m. Darkness swallowed the house, broken only by the dim blue glow of my phone. I grabbed a flashlight, lit the old lantern I kept for outages, and wrapped myself in a quilt near the wood stove. The temperature was already dropping. By midnight, the storm was at full force. Snow hammered the windows like gravel. Wind screamed around the eaves. The whole house groaned under the pressure of the gusts. It felt like being trapped inside a giant frozen throat swallowing air in and out. I tried to read to distract myself, but the noise made it hard to concentrate. Then at 2:07 a.m., someone knocked on my front door. I froze. The knock was soft, polite. 3 gentle taps, barely audible over the storm, but unmistakable. Tap, tap. My first thought was that I'd imagined it, that the wind had thrown ice against the siding in the right rhythm. I held still, listening. A moment later, the knock came again. 3 taps, a pause. Then a man's voice, muffled by snow and wood, calling out, "Please, can you help me?" I felt my heart kick hard in my chest. No one should have been out there. Not in this storm, not at 2 in the morning, and especially not without leaving tracks. I hadn't heard anyone approach. No crunch of snow, no footsteps, just the knock. I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself and inched closer, stopping before the door. I didn't open it. Didn't even touch the knob. "Who's there?" I called. The voice answered immediately, too quickly, as if he'd been waiting right next to the door for me to speak. "I'm lost," he said. "Please, let me in." His tone was steady, calm, but something felt off, not the words themselves, but the way they sounded, like a recording played through a thick cloth, muffled, flat, without emotion beyond the shape of the sentence. I squinted through the peephole. Nothing. Just a swirling wall of white, snow blasting sideways so thick I couldn't even see my own porch rail. If someone was standing there, they were positioned perfectly, exactly where the peephole couldn't catch them. I felt my skin crawl. "Sir, you need to stand where I can see you," I said, louder. The voice replied immediately again. Same pacing, same flatness. "I'm cold. Please open the door." That unease in my chest tightened like a fist. "Back up where I can see you," I repeated. No sound came from outside for several long seconds, just wind, just the storm beating at the house like a living thing. Then the knock came again. 3 gentle taps, tap, tap, tap. But this time the voice was different, less muffled, closer, and the tone shifted into something that made my skin prickle. "Please let me in," it whispered, too quiet, as if the lips delivering the words were pressed against the door itself. I stumbled back, knocking over the lantern. My breath stuttered out of me in visible clouds. The room suddenly felt colder, like the heat from the stove was being pulled toward the door. I grabbed the lantern and straightened it, hands shaking. The knock didn't come again, but I felt something change outside. A presence. The air felt compressed, as if something extremely large was leaning close to the house. I forced myself back to the peephole. Still nothing. But this time, the snow wasn't blowing normally. It seemed to fall straight downward in front of the door, like it was hitting something unseen and sliding around it. My stomach twisted. There was someone, something, standing there. Not visible, but blocking the snow. "Please," the voice whispered again. "Let me in." I stepped away from the door so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. I went for my phone, even though the signal up here was usually useless in storms like this. The screen glowed. 1 bar. I dialed 911. It rang. Then suddenly, the faint sound of my dial tone was swallowed by a soft, steady breathing. Not mine. Not from the phone speaker, but behind me, inside the room, right behind me. I whirled around, flashlight beam cutting through the cold air. Nothing, just the living room furniture, the dim lantern light, snow pressing against the windows, but the breathing continued from everywhere at once. Soft, warm, wrong. I backed into the farthest corner of the room, gripping the flashlight hard enough to hurt. The breathing stopped, then the front door handle clicked, just once. A gentle test, like someone pressing down on it with the lightest touch. The lock held, but the latch rattled faintly a second time. More pressure, more confidence. The metal groaned, stretching as if stressed by something with steady, immense strength. I grabbed the fireplace poker and held it like a weapon. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. I whispered to myself, stay away from the door, though I didn't know if it was meant for me or whatever was on the other side. Then everything stopped. No wind, no rattling, no breathing. Just a sudden, unnerving silence. The kind of silence that feels like the world is waiting for something. Slowly, too slowly, I crept toward the window beside the door, crouching low. My flashlight beam swept across the frosted pane. Through the layer of thick snow and ice, I saw nothing but swirling white. I pushed my hand against the window to clear a small patch. As the frost melted beneath my palm, I felt a warmth against the glass. Not from inside the house, from outside, as if someone was pressing their hand to the exact same spot from the other side. My blood turned to ice. I yanked my hand away. The outline of a handprint remained on the glass. 5 long fingers, far too long. The shape fogged the window slowly, as if heated by a breath. I stumbled back. Then the handprint slid upward, not lifted. Slid, as if whatever had made it was dragging its fingers up the glass, the way a child might smear their hand along a cold surface. I grabbed the lantern, my coat, my boots, anything, and ran to the back of the house. The storm outside was still violent, but not as violent as whatever waited at my front door. I knew I couldn't open any door, not with that thing knowing exactly where I was. I barricaded myself in the bedroom. The wind screamed against the side of the house, but underneath it, faint and rhythmic, came a new sound. Knocking. Not at the front door, at the bedroom window. Tap, 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 followed by that same muffled voice. I'm lost. Please help me. The same tone, the same pacing, but the voice was wrong now, twisted somehow, like it was stretching the words, pulling them into shapes that weren't meant to be spoken. Tap, tap, tap. I'm cold. The knocks became harder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. Then the voice dropped lower. Let me in. I shoved a dresser in front of the window, breath shaking, mind racing. I grabbed my phone again. No signal. I was trapped. Hours passed like that, me sitting on the floor, back pressed against the bed frame, listening to the voice shift from pleading to angry to whispering things I couldn't make out. Eventually, the storm began to die down, and the knocking stopped. Just before dawn, I peeked out from behind the dresser. The window was cracked from one corner to the other, a long splintered line through the glass. On the outside, smeared across the frost, were dozens of handprints, some large, some small, all wrong, fingers too long, palms too narrow, but no footprints in the snow beneath the window, not a single one. When the sun finally rose and the storm cleared, the world was painfully bright. The snow on my porch was completely undisturbed. No prints, no marks, nothing but smooth, untouched drifts. Except for one thing. On the front door, carved into the wood, were 3 words, thin, shallow marks etched with precision. I found you. I moved out of that house within a week. But sometimes, late at night, even though I now live in the center of town with neighbors just steps away, I'll hear a soft tapping on my window. Tap, tap, tap. And a voice, barely there, muffled but unmistakable. Please, let me in. I never answer. I don't think it needs me to. Not anymore. I've been a sheriff's deputy in a small northern Ohio county for long enough to know that most calls that sound strange over the radio turn out boring in person. Suspicious vehicle usually means kids smoking, someone sleeping off a hangover, or a broken taillight that offended the wrong neighbor. You get used to rolling your eyes before you even pull up. The night with the car on the lake didn't give me that luxury. It was late January, the kind of winter where the plows never really caught up, and the snowbanks along the roads were more like low walls. The river that cut through our county was frozen solid by then, thick enough that some of the braver locals like to drive their trucks out onto the wider bends to ice fish. Technically illegal, practically normal. I was parked near the edge of town that night, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes earlier when dispatch crackled through the static in my cruiser. "Unit 3, you copy?" "Yeah, go ahead," I said, happy for anything to break the monotony. "We've got a call from a resident along County Road 14 near the old bridge. Reports a car out on the river ice with the engine running. Says it's been there at least 20 minutes and no one's moving around it. Can you check it out?" On my way. The drive took about 10 minutes. The closer I got to the river, the more the headlights bounced off swirling snow. The storm wasn't bad enough to shut down the roads, but it was steady, fine powder driven sideways by wind that made everything look like the inside of a shaken snow globe. County Road 14 was quiet as always. A few scattered farmhouses, mostly dark. I passed the old bridge, a narrow steel skeleton built decades before I was born, and saw the glow before I saw the car. Two pale cones of light, low to the ice, right where the river widened out. It took a second to register what I was looking at. Someone had driven a sedan down the river access ramp and out onto the frozen water. It sat maybe 50-60 yards from shore, perfectly centered in a patch of white. Headlights on, tailpipes puffing little bursts of exhaust into the air, doors hanging open. I pulled onto the shoulder, killed my siren, and left only the light bar glowing soft blue and red behind me. For a minute I just watched, half expecting someone to stumble into view, waving, embarrassed. No one did. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3, I said into the radio. "I've got eyes on the vehicle. Black four-door sedan, looks like an older Honda. It's out on the ice. Engine appears to be running. I'm gonna go check for occupants." "Copy, Unit 3. Be advised, caller was the Martin residence. They're watching from the house and say they haven't seen anyone around the car at all." "Copy," I said, more to myself than to dispatch. "That's odd." I stepped out of the cruiser and the cold slapped me in the face. The wind coming off the river felt sharper, somehow more directed, as if it knew exactly where I was standing. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked down the slope toward the access ramp. My flashlight cut a stark tunnel through the powder. The ice below looked solid. We'd had sub-zero temperatures for weeks. I'd driven on thicker ice up near the reservoirs when I was a kid, but something about walking toward that running car made the surface feel thin, like it might give way under the weight of my thoughts alone. I paused at the edge of the river, testing the ice with a boot. It groaned softly, the sound echoing under my feet and off the dark banks. Then it steadied. "Great," I muttered. "Let's not die tonight." I moved slowly, weight distributed carefully, flashlight beam locked on the car. The closer I got, the stranger the scene seemed. All four doors were open. The front driver's seat empty. The passenger seats empty. The interior light glowed a dull yellow, washing weakly across the dashboard. The radio hissed low static, cut through occasionally by bursts of garbled signal I couldn't make out. Heater on full blast. That stood out immediately. The air pouring from the vents into the empty car was hot. I could feel it even from a few feet away, clashing with the cold in the strangest way, like standing between two climates. "Hello?" I called, voice carrying across ice and wind. "Sheriff's Department? Is anyone out here?" No answer, only the faint whisper of the heater and the breathy static from the radio. I circled the car, no one crouching beside it, no one on the ice. The headlights illuminated only a swirling wall of white ahead, snow dancing in the beam like dust. Then I saw the footprints. At first I thought there were none. The wind had smoothed the ice near the car to a glassy sheen in places, snow drifting around the tires. But when I swept my light farther beyond the headlights, I caught them, about 20 feet away. One set of tracks. Boot prints, deep and clearly defined, leading away from the driver's side door across the ice. They marched in a straight line toward the center of the river, then farther, toward the darker stretch where the current ran strongest beneath the surface. I followed them, heart sinking with each step. The prints got closer together the farther they went, like whoever had made them started walking faster, maybe even running. The last few were nearly on top of each other, depth pressed hard into the snow, and then they just stopped. No scuff where someone slipped. No hole in the ice. No cracked white giving way to black water, just one final footprint, toe pointing into nothing. Beyond it, only untouched snow and unbroken ice as far as my light reached. The feeling that swept over me in that moment was hard to name. It wasn't just fear, it was a kind of vertigo, a disorienting sense that the rules I'd built my life on had shifted by a fraction of a degree, just enough to make everything feel wrong. I swallowed hard and backed up, following my own prints back to the car. The radio static grew louder when I got closer, like someone had turned the volume knob while I was making my retreat. I leaned inside and turned the ignition off out of habit. For a second, everything went silent, the sudden absence of engine noise and blower fans making the world feel heavier. Then the radio crackled alive again on its own, even though I was sure I'd killed power to it. A whisper of voice bled through the static. "Help." I flicked the knob off completely. This time it stayed dark. "Dispatch Unit 3, I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Car appears unoccupied. Engine was running, doors open. I've got one set of footprints leading away from the vehicle out onto the river ice. Tracks end without sign of, breakage in the ice. No sign of the driver." A pause. "Say again, Unit 3? Tracks end where?" "About 50 feet from the vehicle. They just stop. Ice looks intact. No hole, no blood, no..." I trailed off because saying it out loud made it sound like something from a story, not a report. Dispatch was quiet for a second longer than usual. "Copy, Unit 3. I'll notify the sheriff and start a call-out for search and rescue in the morning. For now, see if you can get the vehicle's plates and any ID." I forced myself to focus. The license plate belonged to a Stephen Harlow, local address in town, late 30s. I'd seen the name before. He'd been in a minor fender bender months back. No warrants, no history. Inside the car, his wallet sat in the center console, as if he'd taken it out to grab something and just not put it back. Driver's license, cards, some cash. Nothing scattered, nothing rifled through. The glove box held registration, insurance, the usual junk. The back seat had a backpack with a thermos and a folded-up flannel. The thermos was still warm. Whoever had been driving hadn't planned on being gone long. I had the car towed from the ice within the hour. The driver of the tow truck, Connie, a tough woman who'd been hauling wrecks out of ditches longer than I'd been alive, kept glancing at the river. "Don't like it," she said as the winch groaned. "Ice feels wrong this year." "What do you mean?" I asked, grateful for conversation. "Too loud," she said vaguely. "You ever notice that? When the ice gets real thick, it groans lower, deep. Sounds like the river's asleep. But tonight it's higher, like it's awake and moving around under there." I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't want any. We got the sedan off the river and up to the impound lot, and I went home long after my shift ended. I slept badly, dreaming of boot prints marching out into nothing. By dawn, the search started. We had volunteers, the fire department, and a rescue team from the next county over. They combed the river banks, the woods on either side, and the ice itself. We even brought in a drone to scan the area from above. Nothing, no additional tracks, no body, no hole in the ice, no broken reeds along the shore. It was like Harlow had stepped into the middle of the river and just dissolved. Officially, the incident went into the report as missing person, presumed deceased due to environmental exposure. That box on the form doesn't have a space for "and disappeared into thin air." I tried to close the file in my head. People do stupid things in winter. They underestimate cold, overestimate their stamina. They get turned around and wander in circles until their bodies give out. Just because we hadn't found him didn't mean something impossible happened. It just meant we hadn't looked in the right place. That's what I told myself. Until the screaming started. It happened 3 nights later. I was back on patrol, different area this time, but the river wound through everything in this part of the county. You could hear it in places when the wind was right, a distant, deep creaking under the ice. That night, snow had stopped falling, leaving the world clearer but colder. My breath fogged the inside of the cruiser. The call came from the same family that had reported the car on the ice. "Help," the woman said, voice shaking. "You need to send someone, now." "Ma'am, what's happening?" I asked, already turning the cruiser in the direction of their road. "It's the river," she said. "Under the ice. I think someone's..." Her voice cut off as if she'd pulled the phone away. I heard faint noise in the background like a television turned low. Then something higher, more jagged, a sound you don't mistake once you've heard it. Screaming, raw, desperate, drawn-out screaming. "Ma'am," I said urgently, "are you safe inside the residence? Do you see anyone outside?" "It's under the ice," she whispered. It's coming from under the ice." By the time I pulled into their driveway, half the lights in the house were on. The Martins, husband, wife, teenage daughter, stood near the back porch, bundled in coats and hats, faces pale. They didn't step off the deck, they just stared toward the river. I joined them, and in the sharp, brittle air, I heard it too. At first I thought it was the ice cracking. Freeze-thaw cycles sometimes make eerie sounds, booms and moans and sharp reports that echo up and down the water. But this wasn't that. This was human, or close enough my brain insisted it was. A long, distant scream rose from the direction of the river, not from the surface, not from the banks, from beneath. It started low and muffled, like the screamer was underwater or behind a wall. Then it climbed higher, pushed through whatever barrier smothered it, and twisted into something that sounded like a plea. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was unmistakable, agonized, panicked, frantic. It went on far longer than a normal scream. Then it cut off suddenly, replaced by a jagged, choking sound, like lungs filling with something they shouldn't. "That's the third time," Mr. Martin whispered. "Always same time. Last night, night before. Wakes us up. I thought I was losing my mind until my wife heard it too." "Have you seen anyone out there?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the way they were huddled. "No," his wife said. "But tonight, before you pulled up, I thought I saw something, like a shadow moving under the ice, following the sound." The scream began again, farther downstream this time. The echo bounced between the banks in a sickening way. I flashed my light across the river out of reflex. The beam caught white, then the faint suggestion of a dark shape sliding just below the surface, almost like a shadow of someone walking where no one could. Something in me broke rank then. Procedure said wait, call for backup, mark the location and bring in specialized teams. But my feet were already moving, boots crunching onto the snow toward the access ramp. "Deputy, wait!" Mrs. Martin called. "Don't go out there." I didn't listen. Or maybe I heard her and pretended I didn't, so I wouldn't have to admit I chose to ignore the warning. The ice groaned softly under my weight as I stepped onto it, flashlight beam locked on the area where I thought I'd seen movement. The scream had stopped again, replaced by a sound like scraping. A slow, rhythmic scrape, as if something hard was being dragged along the underside of the ice. Closer, closer. "Hey!" I shouted over the pounding of my heart. "If someone's fallen through the ice, shout! Tell me where you are!" Silence. Then, faintly from directly beneath my feet, help. My lungs seized, not because of the word itself, because of the way it sounded. Warped, stretched, filtered as if pushed through too much distance, too much water, too much cold. The same way the voice on Harlow's car radio had sounded. I dropped to one knee and pressed my gloved hand to the ice. The cold bit through the fabric instantly. I shone my light downward. Through the cloudy thickness, I could make out only vague suggestions of shapes. Dark, shifting things moving below. They might have been rocks in the riverbed, or they might have been something else. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice coming out hoarse. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, clearer, closer, from a spot inches away. "Please." Something thumped against the underside of the ice, hard enough that I felt it through my hand. I jerked back instinctively. The ice didn't crack, it didn't spiderweb, but for a brief second, a pale shape pressed against it from below, as though a face without features had been slammed against glass. A smooth bulge, almost human-sized, distorted by the thickness and cold. Then it slid away, leaving only milky white. I scrambled backward, nearly losing my footing, and didn't stop moving until I was back on the shore. The Martins stared at me like I'd walked out of a burning building untouched. "You heard that, right?" Mr. Martin said. "You heard, it's not just us?" "I heard something," I managed. "Stay away from the river at night. All of you. Keep your doors locked. I'll get the sheriff out here in the morning." What I didn't say was, I have no idea what we'll be looking for. It didn't stop after that. For a week, like clockwork, the screams came from under the ice. Always between 2 and 2:30 a.m. Always starting upstream near where we'd found Harlow's car and drifting downstream as if carried by the current. Other residents started reporting it too. people living along the river, then people farther into town who swore they heard it on particularly still nights. We went through every rational explanation. Maybe the ice was shifting in a way that mimicked human sound. Maybe some prankster had planted speakers somewhere along the banks. We searched, we tested, we found nothing. The missing persons case file sat on my desk like a weight. Every time I opened it, my eyes caught on a small detail from the autopsy report that never was. Body not recovered. 3 bland words that implied an absence, not just an absence of evidence, an absence of closure. The sheriff tried to keep things calm, told the press as little as possible, called in a hydrologist to study the ice, a sound engineer to see if natural processes could create the noises folks were reporting. The hydrologist said the ice was strangely uniform for a freeze of that speed. Almost too perfect, he'd muttered, frowning at his instruments. Like it froze all at once instead of layer by layer. The sound engineer spent 2 nights on the river and refused to come back for a third. He left us a written note instead. Whatever that is, he wrote, it's not a natural acoustic phenomenon. The harmonics are wrong. They're intentional. I didn't like the word intentional being attached to something unseen. On the 10th night after we found the car, the screaming changed. I woke up at 2:13 a.m. to my phone vibrating on the nightstand. For a second, I thought it was another call from dispatch. Instead, it was my personal cell phone. Unknown number. I answered out of reflex, still half asleep. Hello? Static on the other end. Then far away but unmistakable, that same agonized cry I'd heard from the river, not echoing across ice this time, poured directly into my ear. I jerked the phone away, heart racing. The scream climbed higher, twisting, paralleling the ambient hiss. Then it dropped suddenly into a hoarse, gasping whisper. Please help me. I recognized the voice. I'd only heard it once before, on the radio of that car on the ice. Harlow? I asked before I could stop myself. The whisper on the other end hiccuped into something like a sob. Then, urgently, it's not water. What do you mean? I whispered back as if something might overhear our conversation. Not water, he rasped. It's cold and thick, but not water. It moves. A sound like choking swallowed the words. My call timer ticked upward. Where are you? I asked, throat dry. Under, he breathed. Under and around. It doesn't let go. It pulls. It looks like you. All of you. Faces, hands, wrong. It doesn't want out. It wants. The line crackled violently this time, like someone had dropped the phone into a vat of boiling oil. It wants you to know, he whispered so quietly I could barely hear him. Wants you to hear. It's learning to sound right. Then, in a perfect imitation of my own voice, the line whispered, please let me in. The call dropped. I sat in the dark, panting, phone trembling in my hand. The urge to throw it across the room fought with the urge to call back, even though there was no number to call. The display just read, unknown. Outside, faint through my bedroom window, I heard it again, the distant screams under the ice. But tonight they sounded clearer, more human, less distorted. Less like someone trapped under a barrier and more like someone shouting in the open air. When I reported the call to the sheriff the next morning, he stared at me for a long time before saying anything. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. Let's keep that between us for now, he said. Last thing we need is it getting around that you're getting ghost calls from the missing guy. So you believe me? I asked. He hesitated. I believe you believe what you heard, he said. And I'm not going to sit here and act like what's been happening on that river makes sense. But we still have to live here after this. People still have to function. You understand? I did. I also understood that refusing to name something doesn't make it less real. The last night I went to the river was the coldest yet. Wind chill in the negatives. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache when you breathe through your mouth. I parked near the old bridge and turned off the cruiser, but left the engine idling, as if I knew I might need a quick escape. The sky was clear for once, stars sharp and brittle. The river lay like a black line through the land, its surface crusted in white. I stepped out, my breath instantly billowing. No one else was around. No house lights nearby, just me and the ice, and the voices. They started as a hiss, like air leaking from a lung. Then they layered over each other. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all whispering different things in a language that wasn't quite anything I recognized. Under them, deeper, something groaned with a sound like shifting earth. As I walked toward the bank, the whispers aligned, not into words, into the shape of one word: help. Over and over, overlapping, blending into an awful chorus. Help. I stepped onto the ice. It felt solid, but under my boots something pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. I don't know how, I said aloud, not because I thought whatever was down there could hear, but because I needed to hear myself say it. The whispers rose in pitch, trembling. A long, hollow wail slipped between them, familiar and awful. The first scream we'd heard days ago, the one I'd thought belonged to Harlow. Now it sounded distant, like one voice in a crowd. I moved toward the center of the river, adrenaline pounding in my veins. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing on a patch of ice where the snow had blown clear. There, directly beneath the surface, something moved. Not fast, not in any direction I understood. It was like watching smoke trapped in glass, swirling sluggishly. The shape thickened, thinned, expanded. Faces pressed against the underside of the ice from below, but they weren't quite faces, more like impressions of faces, half-formed and shifting. Eyes too far apart or too close together, mouths too wide or too narrow. As I watched, one of them slid into clarity. A man's face, early 30s. Eyes I recognized from a grainy driver's license photo. "Stephen?" I whispered. His expression warped between calm and terror in a nauseating loop. His mouth opened, but the scream that came out wasn't synced with the movement. It was delayed, lagging behind like a badly dubbed film. I dropped to my knees without thinking, hands flat against the ice. The cold stabbed into my bones. "What is this?" I shouted, though I wasn't sure who I was asking. "What do you want?" The faces below shifted in unison, all eyes, too many eyes, turning upward. For one long, horrifying moment, they aligned into a single vast arrangement, like one enormous thing made of countless smaller ones. Then they all smiled. If you've never seen faces smile wrong, I hope you never do. Normal smiles are almost impossible to misread. There's muscle memory behind them, warmth, recognition. This was none of that. These smiles were too precise. Every lip curled at the same angle, every cheek lifted to the same height, but there was nothing human in them. It was like watching a mask flex. A sound hit me then, not through my ears but in my bones. A deep, thrumming vibration that made my vision blur for a second. The ice under my hands grew colder, then warmer, like something beneath was heating it from below. And then, all at once, the voices snapped into perfect mimicry. "Please let me in," they said in a layered chorus. In my voice. I stumbled backward, slipping, scrambling on hands and knees until I reached the snowy bank. I didn't look back again. I ran to the cruiser, slammed myself inside, and drove away faster than I should have on winter roads. I never went back to the river alone. We still haven't found Harlow's body. The screams under the ice faded as winter turned to a reluctant spring. By the time the thaw truly began, the river groaned and cracked the way rivers are supposed to. People went back to fishing from the banks. Kids skipped stones again. The Martins put their house up for sale. But every winter since, as soon as the river freezes and the first real cold snap hits, the calls start up again. "Deputy," I heard something under the ice. "Sheriff's office. There was someone screaming out on the river last night." It sounded like me. It sounded like my husband, my kid, my neighbor. I know better now than to walk onto the ice when the voices call. I know better than to lean in when something beneath the surface promises it just needs help. When I'm on duty and I drive past the old bridge, I make a point not to look directly down at the water. Because sometimes, in the edge of my peripheral vision, I see things moving under there. Dark shapes that aren't quite fish, aren't quite current. Sometimes, when the radio in my cruiser crackles late at night, I hear more than dispatch, little slips of something else. A whisper of my own voice, begging, "Please let me in." I shut the radio off when that happens. But I can still hear it, faintly, in the hum of the heater and the rattle of the windows. Not because it's louder than everything else. Because it's patient. And because now I know what it's doing. It isn't trying to get out. It's practicing. It's learning how to sound exactly like the people it wants to call out onto the ice next. And one quiet night, when the snow is falling just right and the river is sealed under a perfect glassy sheet, I know someone else will find a car idling where it shouldn't be. Doors open, heater on, radio hissing, and one set of footprints leading out, and none coming back.